Tim. It's good to have you on this podcast with me and Pete. This is David speaking. We want to just get to know you and introduce you to our audience. And we thought one way to do that is just for you to say, like, who are you? Help us to get to know you, and maybe drill into one chapter of your history that folks may not know. This might be connected to your family, your faith journey, but help us understand what makes you tick today. So help us get to know some of your history so as we can get to know who Tim Yee is today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on this podcast. Well, my name is Tim, and I'm currently a youth pastor here at Community Church of Seattle, and I've been doing youth ministry for about 13 or 14 years. So it's been a very long time. Originally from the East Coast, and I grew up in a Taekwondo family, and so my dad is a Taekwondo master. He has his own school in the East Coast, and so I grew up doing martial arts from a very young age, and so I grew up in the sport. I witnessed my dad teach his students, and he's still doing it now. He's like hitting 70, but he's in better shape than I am. And so I seen him, train his students for all these years. And he's at a point in his career where his students in the very beginning part of his career are now having their own families. And now they're bringing their kids to his Taekwondo studio. And so he's been training, students in his community for a couple of decades now, to the point where his first students are now having their own kids and he's training them. And so for me, I was very influenced by that. I was like, man, my dad influenced a lot of people throughout his entire Taekwondo career. And so I witnessed the influence that he's had. He invested in a lot of his students, and to the point where now they're adults and now they're bringing their younger kids. And so for me, I felt like even though my dad was teaching them Taekwondo, he was doing a lot more than that, right? He was kind of being like a life coach to his students. And so for me, I've witnessed that my entire life. And I think that naturally brought me into ministry, where it's like, man, one person could have such a deep impact on the younger generation, and he's still doing it to this day. And I think that's kind of like one of the things that makes me tick in terms of ministry, is he was obedient in this calling for a very long time, and I see the fruit of that 30 years later. And when it comes to ministry, that's kind of my mentality. Youth ministry, you have to be in it for the long term in order to see any kind of fruit. And so I feel like the reasons why I'm still in youth ministry and I'm still doing it really was because of how my dad taught his students. And so that's kind of my motivation behind youth ministry, is you spend time with them, you grow with them, you teach them, and you invest in them, so that there will be that point where it kind of makes sense, where faith kind of clicks to them, and they're like, wow, like this is what the gospel is all about. This is what church is all about. This is what faith is all about. And so, just going back to your question, that's kind of what makes me tick. And that's kind of like why I got into youth ministry, just seeing how powerful relationship building is with the younger generation. And I saw that from my dad. So,
Tim, being a Korean American pastor, both of us in Korean American churches, that's usually not the norm. Youth pastors are, this may be terrible to say, but it feels like we use youth pastoring or that position as kind of a jumping off point. It's like where everyone starts, but it's not where you want to end up. It's really just kind of a pit stop along the journey, and everyone has aspirations to do longer. But coming from your dad's example and being obviously motivated by that, and that like really driving you to do what you do, can you kind of maybe help us to see what because youth is such a transient ministry, right? Like, they grow up and then they graduate and things like that. But what are you hoping to see in the youth as you do it long term, and as you really invest and kind of stick to that calling long term, the way that your dad has done with his calling in Taekwondo?
Yeah, I was having a conversation with this veteran youth worker. He just randomly contacted me, and he's been in youth ministry for about over 30 years. And so I was actually surprised that he reached out to me. And one thing that he said was, youth ministry sometimes will feel like JV ministry, right? That's how kind of pastors kind of paint it as. It's like, oh, it's a springboard, like you said. It's just something to do while, the bigger position is out there. And so, but I never felt that way about youth ministry. And I don't think it should be, because when you look at youth students, most of them, they come to a faith decision during their high school years, the majority. And so for me, it's like, if that's the majority of all of people coming to faith in that particular season of life, then we can't miss that opportunity. And for me, that's kind of been my motivation. It's laying that groundwork, laying that foundation, so that students, when they grow up and become adults, they'll have something to stand upon, and they'll have some kind of faith foundation to live their lives, regardless of what obstacles or what struggles may come their way. And so, kind of tying that into my dad, yes, he was teaching them Taekwondo, but at the end of the day, I think the reason why he was so successful was he built all that on trust, right? The students not only saw him as a Taekwondo master, but kind of saw him like as another father figure. And he was able to develop that trust with his students. And I think that's why he's still doing it to this day, and why he's still able to reap, the benefits of what he's doing. And so I kind of linked that into my youth ministry, where I want to be able to develop a relationship of trust with all my youth students, and to show them, hey, this is what faith looks like. I might not be perfect, but we can do life together and share faith together. But that only comes when you develop a relationship with trust with our students. And so for me, it's all about trust and developing that relationship with my youth students.
This is really helpful, hearing the connections between your practice of youth ministry and your dad's ministry of teaching Taekwondo. And you two words jump out. You mentioned relationship and trust. So not having grown up in a Taekwondo family and not having learned Taekwondo, I've not been around that sport. But is your dad's teaching style common or uncommon within the Taekwondo world? Is it common for Taekwondo teachers to be relational and to practice kind of trust, or not?
Yeah, I would say it's common in the sense where Taekwondo is very similar, right? The disciplines are very important, right? You need to respect, everyone. There is like a sense of hierarchy, right? Depending on what belt color you are, you still have to respect them, regardless of how old or how young you are. And so I think him teaching that is very common. But what's very uncommon about his approach in teaching Taekwondo, and how I try to mimic that in my life, is there is a sense of approachability when it comes to my dad. When you think of Taekwondo masters, not all of them, but the majority of them, they're very hard to approach. They could be a little, I want to be careful with what I use, just hard to approach. It's like he's the master and I'm the student, and that's the relationship that we have. And I think there is some good to that. But I think where my dad kind of breaks that paradigm is it all comes back to that relationship of trust. Yes, he is my master, but he's also someone that I could go to for life's problems. He's also someone that I could talk to, and he's also someone that I could relate to, right? Even though most of his students are middle school and high school and college students as well. So there is that sense of relatability. There is that sense of vulnerability, and there is that sense of like he could have fun, and he'd be playing tag with his students before class. He would crack jokes, and so yeah, it's common in the sense of how he did Taekwondo, right? Teaching respect and discipline, but uncommon where students can approach him for anything. And I think when it comes to the church world, right, there is that relationship, pastor and church member. And I think, yes, that relationship is important, but especially in the Korean American church, that boundary is very clearly defined. And I think one thing that I try to break, especially with my youth ministry, is yes, I am your pastor, but I also want you to feel comfortable enough where you can come and share your life with me, right? We don't have to talk about faith, right? We don't have to talk about the Bible. But when we talk about life's issues, I give them an opportunity to look at it through the lens of faith, without them realizing that we're talking about faith. And so that's something that I try to implement every single day. Is I want you to feel comfortable enough where you can approach me about anything. Just ask me anything, and I'll be here for you. And so that's something that I try to do. And so often I'll have a lot of youth students message me on Instagram. They'll DM me, some of their things and issues, relationship issues that they go with. Mainly, it's about relationship and dating. But the fact that they can talk to me about what's going on in their lives shows me, okay, um, there is a level of trust, there is a level of approachability, and I feel like that is the best way for youth pastors to minister to their students, because if you don't get there, then you're not going to be talking about their faith. You're not going to be talking about, how Jesus met them. You're not going to be talking about, the Bible. But sometimes we need to start there.
I think so. I used to be a youth pastor a while back, and so I'm the guy who was in youth and then moved on. So you're the good one. I'm not so much here, but particularly after COVID, I know that youth are changing quite a bit. The world is changing, but what do you feel like is, like, in your experience, what are the students coming to you to talk about most, and what are some of the things that you're noticing about our students that, because I think a lot of folks and a lot of pastors and a lot of also parents, I think, are wondering, because the disconnect between parents and their children, I think, is widening as the days and the months pass. And so someone like you who are relating to them and connecting to them in the way that you are, and being relatable and approachable in a way that they can reach out to you, it'd be really helpful to know, like, what you are experiencing as a youth pastor, what they're wanting to talk about, what some of the issues are, and kind of what you're seeing as some trends that we might want to kind of key in on in terms of with our youth and just being able to help them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's like one particular issue that comes up, because there's just so many different topics that come up. Each student, they have their own struggle. Some students will struggle with family, maybe not having, father or mother. Some students struggle with your future. We have a lot of ambitious people here in Seattle. And so for them, it's all about success. It's all about making the most money. And we have other students, frankly, relationship is all that they're thinking about. It's like, what are some things that I could do to get this person to be in a relationship with me? I think the one thing is just having students know that whatever issues that they have, that they can come to the church, that they can come to their teacher, they can come to the pastor. I think oftentimes you students, they hesitate to bring their issues to the church, right? Because they fear that there is a level of judgment, that they will be shamed for having these certain questions, right? And so I try to foster that level of trust and vulnerability. And I try to teach that to my teachers too, is whatever questions, whatever issues they have, let's just welcome them, hear them out without any sense of judgment first. And I think that's the most important, because I feel like, if anything, if they can't come to the church, they're going to go to their friends, they're going to go to the world, and they're going to be hearing things that are not Christian, which we don't want. And so I want them to feel like they can come to the church and they have a level of trust to share those issues with us. And more specifically, one thing that I'm hearing more and more of is anxiety and depression. Mental health is on the rise. And so what I've realized is, at least for me, being a millennial, vulnerability was something that we shied away from, right? We didn't want to share what our struggles were. It was more like oh, this is something that I need to fight on my own, right? It's like a self-internal battle. And this is how I'm going to overcome these issues, right? I don't want anyone else to know. But I feel like that trend is changing a little bit, where at least Gen Z, they're actually a lot more open about their issues. And so we just came back from a retreat, and during the prayer time, a lot of my students came up and they're just sharing with me how much they struggle with depression, how much they struggle with anxiety, how much they struggle with not having a father figure. And so these conversations I did not hear 10 years ago, right? Because everyone just kind of kept it to themselves. But now I hear kind of a cry of help, a cry of desperation from this generation of youth. And I think they just want someone to hear them out and to meet them where they are. And so there is more of a sense of openness in their struggles, especially with mental health. And so what I struggle with as a pastor is, these are things that are kind of outside of my training. And so it's just having them, giving them resources or connect them with people who can help them with those issues. And so that's kind of what I've noticed over the past couple of years. There's an openness to sharing their struggles. There's a cry of desperation. So they really do want some help, but they don't know where to go to. And so I'm hoping that the church could welcome and embrace those questions and those doubts and those struggles that they have. And it's really hard in the Korean American church because we're such a shame-based culture, and so it's like, oh my gosh, if you have mental health issues, then there must be something wrong with you. And so I think for us is we want to normalize it a little bit, saying, hey, everyone has those issues. You're not alone, and you're safe bringing those issues here in the church. Let's walk with it together.
Absolutely. I think this issue of youth ministry, mental health, the cry for help and desperation, huge topics. And I think it'll be a thread throughout some of our conversation. But I want to just unpack perhaps one more facet of your history before talking more about ministry again. What do you think, were there some formative experiences either at home or in your earlier years which gave you skills to be a source where people can be vulnerable? Like, it strikes me that it takes some self-knowledge to adapt to, being transparent, being vulnerable. These are not necessarily natural things, or they could be natural things. So do you think this is more of just your personality and disposition? Is this an acquired skill that you learned through difficult experiences the hard way? Yeah, I'm just curious, like what in your previous life prepared you to do what you do today?
Yeah. David, as I'm talking, I realized, man, being transparent and being vulnerable is not something I'm very good at. Actually, it's something that's very, very difficult for me, especially as an introvert too. There is a sense of like, oh, like I don't want to share, my thoughts and my feelings and what I'm going through, because especially as a pastor in a Korean American church, how you present yourself is very important. And so the more vulnerable and the more transparent you are, the weaker you can look like. And, once you become too transparent, then sometimes, sadly, your credibility as a pastor can diminish a little bit, especially in the immigrant church. And I realize, and that's a struggle that I have to this day. But I think one thing that did kind of change it a little bit, and this is kind of like an extreme example, but I went about 10 years ago. I had a really hardship in my life where I lost my mother to cancer. And this happened like really quickly. When we found it, she was stage 4 liver cancer, died away within 3 months when she was diagnosed. And so for me, I suffered a lot by myself. I did go through my own season of depression and like kind of beating myself up, playing the victim, and just kind of drowning in my own sadness. And I think there is a time to grieve and mourn, but you can't stay there. And I think for me, I stayed there a little bit too long, right? I isolated myself a bit too much from other people, from my family, my friends, and especially my community. And looking back in hindsight, that was not very healthy for me. And I realized, man, like suffering, it is a part of life, but we don't have to go through it alone. And I think the one positive that came out of that season of my life is um, it softened my heart to other people's pain and suffering, right? Unfortunately, I had to go through that, but now I'm in a position where when people share their suffering, whether it be losing a family member or losing a job, yeah, I might not know exactly what it's like, but I've known what it felt like to be like, oh my gosh, like I feel so alone. And so I feel like for me, my experience of suffering kind of opened my heart a little bit more to feel the pain of others and to enter into their pain and their suffering, but also to kind of bring them out a little bit. And so for me, when I talk with my youth students, when they share their pain and their suffering, regardless of how extreme it is, there is a sense of compassion that I feel for them. There is a sense of empathy, which I feel like the world needs more of today, because the world is very brutal. The world is very abrasive. The world is not very kind to your suffering, right? The world is all about what you can accomplish, what you can do. It's all about your accolades. Um, but I think for youth ministry, it's more about will you be with me? Who can I go to? Who can I turn to? And so I think for me, as much as that season of my life sucked, and I don't wish upon it on anyone else, I don't want to go through it again. But I think the one thing that God taught me is this season is not only going to transform your own life, but I'm going to use it so that you could touch others and meet other people in their midst of their pain and their suffering. And so I'm grateful for that. And, um, and I feel like God has kind of used that season of my life to counsel other people, to be a conduit of compassion and empathy.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Tim. I think yeah, so much of what you shared is exactly, I think, what I recognized about my own life, and just some of the many things that I went through. There was a season where I think, as I was kind of understanding why I grew up the way that I did, I remember this one story, and I think it's exactly the same thing the way that you did. I actually had a friend of mine who's a pastor. He called me and he said, "Hey, Pete, a youth student came up to me and shared this, and it was about abandonment, I think, and parental issues, divorce, and things of that nature. And he said, I have zero idea how to respond to this student, because I've never gone through anything like that. His parents have been, his home was a very happy one, all that kind of stuff. He just had zero idea. But I grew up in a very broken home, and so he said, but I know that you would know how to respond. How would you respond to that? So I think it's this idea. I think you're touching upon this, like the pain and the suffering that you went through. I love the way they put it. Like, everyone, like, suffering is inevitable, but God can use that suffering in many different ways, and it's not pointless, right? It's doing something, and it's causing you. It'll cause you to open up, cause you to obviously understand a bit deeper. And do you find yourself sharing that part of your life more to others, kind of as a way of inviting them into a relationship with you? Because I think I've noticed that whenever I am able to, not that you just go around willy-nilly sharing, that information, but when you get into a relationship, do you find yourself kind of talking about and using your story and using those things that God has taught you and just what God has done in your life as an invitation, as a doorway in for people to be relational? And how does that form the way that you even approach relationships in general with others, and so that you can be a blessing unto them?
Yeah, I try not to share too much because, but so that, again, that's a personal struggle that I have. It's like, oh my gosh, like, why do people even care? Do people even want to hear what I'm going through? So that's kind of an internal struggle that I have all the time. But I realized, the more that I share my brokenness, obviously to a certain extent, right? You don't want to like trauma dump on other people, and I think you do have to be wise. But I think the more that you expose your brokenness, And this all goes back to that relatability and that approachability, right? It's like, oh, okay, so this pastor also has some brokenness, right? They're not all that perfect, they're not all, tidied up and looking good every single Sunday, but there is brokenness. And so for me, that's what I realized is I fear people will judge me, but the exact opposite has happened, right? People relate to me a lot more, and they're more open to sharing what has gone in their lives. And so I think that is a lot more helpful in youth ministry because they're not looking for someone who has it all together. They're looking for someone who can relate to them and who can be real with them. And so that's something that I've realized a little too late, actually, because for me, before it's all about looking like the quote unquote pastor, right? Making sure you look the part. But I think people relate more to your brokenness, right? People will be impressed by your accomplishments, but people give in more, they listen more when you share your brokenness. And I think people would rather have someone who's real rather than someone who hasn't made it all together. So that's just my personal opinion. So I do find myself sharing more and more of those stories because at the end of the day, that's what keeps the fuel going in youth ministry, right? Sometimes youth ministry is very hard, but the wins that we have are the stories from youth ministry. And so that's something that I try to teach my youth teachers all the time because youth ministry, sometimes it's underappreciated, sometimes it's very difficult, sometimes it's hard to see the fruit, but it's really the stories that will kind of keep us going and give us the motivation to continue to serve. So yeah, going back to stories, I think is something that we need to do more. And if you think about Jesus, most of his teachings were through stories. That's what captivated people, right? It draws them in. And so, yeah, being a storyteller is something that I'm trying to do more of in my ministry.
Hmm. Speaking about your ministry, Tim, what has brought you the greatest joy in ministry?
The greatest joy? I think the awesome thing about youth ministry is you get to be part of the students' lives at all the most important events and functions in their life, right? Whether it be baptism or graduation or prom, like you get to be a part of their lives. I think the one thing that I really like about youth ministry is back on the East Coast, I had this one youth student, and he started coming to our church all by himself. He came out every Friday and every Sunday, and he just loved being there. And after a couple months, he decided to become a member of our church. And with youth students, they can't drive to church, so his parents had to drive him to church every single week. But through that, their parents were like, "Hey, like, why is our son like so happy when he comes to church?" To the point where his parents started coming to our church because of the youth student. And then a year later, our youth student decided to get baptized, but he decided to get baptized with his entire family. And so for me, the reason why they're able to get baptized was because of the youth student. Usually when we think about faith, it's always the parents bringing their children to church. But here it was the opposite. It was the student that brought their family to church. And one Easter Sunday, they got baptized all together as a family. And so for me, that's like a huge win in my ministry, where it's like the student brought their dad and their mom to church and got baptized together rather than the other way around. And so, it's just like little moments like that. Just like, oh my gosh, okay, youth ministry is worth it, right? To see a family profess faith in Jesus Christ on Easter Sunday, it's totally worth it. All the sleepless nights, all the lock-ins, all the games, it was worth it because of that moment of a family coming to faith in Jesus Christ, and we get to see them in heaven too. So yeah, that was a huge win in my ministry.
That's amazing. That's like, yeah, that's amazing. Because I think, in churches, sometimes we feel like their parents just drop their kids off and say, take care of them. But this is the complete opposite where, through the faith of a young person, people saw, and I love how you put it, like they saw their son or their student change, and therefore they had to ask, what's making this person change, right? This person I've known forever. And then through that, obviously the answer was the gospel. That's amazing. Kind of on the flip side, uh, yeah, what makes your heart ache the most when it comes to ministry? What are the things that kind of just sadden you the most when it comes to ministry?
I think the biggest thing that breaks my heart is I feel like still youth ministry and just education ministry in general is kind of seen as JV, as I said before. I think, um, you know, the state of youth ministry is declining a lot. And unfortunately, a lot of churches don't have a lot of youth pastors or youth workers just because a lot of churches don't have the resources or the infrastructure to support them. And, in some cases, I totally get it, right? Churches are on the decline. Um, but I think when the church doesn't focus on the next generation, the church will not survive and the church will not thrive. That's actually my belief, And so for me, I want to be at a place where the church not only talks about helping and serving the next generation, but they really have to put their money where their mouth is, or is it mouth where the money is, right? Whatever the term is, right? Um, that's the only way that the church is going to grow. That's the only way that the church is going to last is when they're investing in the next generation. Because at some point, they're going to grow up, they're going to have their own families, and they're going to become the leaders of the church of tomorrow. And I think in order for us to pass the baton of faith and church leadership, it's got to start now, right? Not when they get older. And I feel like biblical training and biblical counseling has to start a lot earlier too in the church because a lot of youth students are growing up not knowing the Bible, not knowing the stories from Scripture, and so we have to start a lot earlier because the world is actually a lot more influential than we think. And so if we're not investing in the generation after us, we're going to lose them once they grow up. The world is a lot more influential with social media and their friends and their community. And so the church actually has to double down, I think, more. But, unfortunately, a lot of churches are unable to do that. And so for me, that really does break my heart. We need to invest a lot more into the youth and the children's ministry. And we also have to support them and not see them as, JV workers, right? But they are, in a sense, varsity, right? We're all working for the kingdom. And so, yeah, I think they just need more support. They need more resources and just more encouragement at the end of the day. So that's kind of like what breaks my heart, a lack of uh, love and a lack of resources shown to the education ministries.
Tim, I want to pivot to your passion project or projects. We know that you've been a committed youth minister. Youth ministry during COVID was really challenged. I think all church ministry was really affected by COVID. And when Pete and I saw you in Seattle, we learned about your YouTube channel that you developed during the COVID years. Do you want to share more about why you started this YouTube channel, what it is, and what you learned through the process about youth ministry by doing it?
Yeah, when you're in youth ministry, you have a lot of conversations with your students. You ask, hey, like, what did you do this past week? And a lot of them was like, oh, I just was on my phone and I watched, YouTube, or I watched a lot of Instagram videos. And so for me, I'm like, okay, like what's so great about YouTube? And I started watching all these videos on YouTube and I was hooked, right? You see all these YouTubers vlogging about their day, about what they're eating, but it's so engaging. And like, I would just swipe video after video and it'd be like 5 hours has gone by. And I'm like, wow, number one, I wasted a lot of time. But number two, I was like really entertained. And then I thought to myself, wow, like, how can a bunch of YouTubers grab the youth students' attention for that long. You know, grabbing attention is so hard in youth ministry, and yet these people are creating videos that could do that. And I thought to myself, man, like if this is where all the students are at, how come the church is not there, right? This is what's capturing their attention. And so, you know, I started, you know, doing a little research, and there was just not a lot of content geared towards faith and the church, you know, digitally at that point, right? We're talking about like 2014, 2015. This is kind of like the highlight of like when YouTube was kind of getting a lot of steam and a lot of popularity. And so I thought to myself, man, like it would be awesome if there was, you know, faith content on this platform for our youth students, but no one was doing it. And so for me, I felt like that plant and that vision was planted, you know, about 7 or 8 years ago, but I never had the courage or the encouragement to do it just because, first of all, I don't know how to record a video. And number two, it's very scary to put yourself in front of a camera to record and then upload it for everyone to see. But you know, year after year, I just saw a lot of students becoming more engaged with YouTube and social media. And you can make the argument that, you know, it's bad. There's a lot of negative effects. And I think there is some truth to that. But for me, it was more like, what if we used it for good instead, right? What if we took this platform and used it for the church and used it for God and used it for the kingdom? And so just one day I was like, hey, what the heck? What do I have to lose? So I just recorded a video and I just did it. And I did it every single week. And in the beginning, it didn't get a lot of steam. But the more I consistently uploaded the videos, it started gaining traction. And then COVID hit, and you know, COVID was a terrible time, but it actually kind of worked out in my favor because everything went online. And so I already had a collection of videos where, you know, people started watching them and it started getting a lot of views and people started sharing them to the point where I, you know, gained, I think, a good amount of subscribers and a lot of influence. And so for me, I was like, okay, this is it, right? This is the future of ministry, right? This is another. So for me, I see video ministry and digital ministry as another mission field, right? And I feel like we're losing a lot of opportunity if we don't invest and go into this field because, you know, frankly speaking, Gen Z and the generation after them, which is Generation Alpha, right? They're all going to be on their phones, right? It's a digital world that they're going to grow up in. And I feel like the church has to meet them where they are, right? We need to be involved more in the platforms because, you know, that's where they're going to be. And so that's kind of been my motivation, is meeting students where they are. And so for me, that's my mission field. Yes, we want to serve them every Sunday in person, but also how can we reach out to them from Monday to Saturday, right? Because there's 168 hours in 1 week, but we only have them like an hour or two or max. So how can we also reach them, you know, throughout the week? And I think digital ministry is one of the ways that we could do that. And, you know, I also love it too, because you could also be creative too. You know, you could use your creativity to reach the youth on those platforms. So, yeah.
For those of us, the audience who doesn't know Tim's YouTube channel, he's got 10,000 plus subscribers, which is not little at all. And he's making all content, you know, obviously on scripture and things like that. So what's been one of your favorite, like, I guess two questions. Where do you get your ideas? Right? Because you have I'm looking at it right now, and there's a couple of them where you do like a series where it's like, you know, the first word, fourth, second word, and you do it within like it's the final 7 words of Jesus, and then you get other things. Like, where do you get the ideas for the content? And then what's been kind of your favorite, like what enjoyable or like favorite kind of video to make, right? So and then for the audience, if you want to get it, just YouTube Timothy Yee, and it comes up, and Tim's picture will be up there. But yeah, what's been kind of your, how do you get your ideas? And then what has been maybe one of your favorite videos and why?
That's a good question. You know, I think you have to consume a lot of content to get a lot of ideas. For me, I'm the firm believer there's nothing new under the sun, right? It's just taking what's been done and then adding your own unique spin and flavor and personality to it. And so for me, as a pastor, like coming up with content we come up with content every single week, right? We are a content creator, right? We have to create sermons, and it's going to be the same thing, right? The Bible doesn't change, but we bring our own spin to it, our own flavor, right? I bring what I can bring to the text. And so for me, I try to do the same thing with video content. It's like, what are some things that you students need to hear? What are some questions that need to be answered? What are some issues that the average churchgoer or the average person is thinking, and how can I answer that in my own way? And I think that's the most important thing that helped me in ministry. It's like, I'm not trying to be someone else. I'm just Tim. I'm just myself with my own personality, and that will resonate with a certain group of people. And those people will, continue to watch you and continue to subscribe to you and continue to be, your followers. And so when it comes to content creation, there's so much content out there. It's just that people need to hear it in your voice. You need to hear it from your perspective. And I think that's the most important thing. And also as a pastor, I feel like, pastors are human too. And so, you can bring like a human element. So I try to show more of my personal life, typical day in a pastor, that's something that a lot of people don't know, right? But it's different. And so I feel like for me, it's like, how can I create content where it's different and it's unique to me? And I think that's kind of been the most joyful type of content that I've created. Going back to your question, what's the most joyful content that I like to create? To be honest, I haven't done a lot of it, but I think my favorite kind of content is just showing what a pastor does in a typical week. And I think there was one video that I made, what a pastor does on their Sabbath day, right? Or on their day off, right? It didn't get a lot of views, but for me, it was fun because I just simply got to share my life, I went to like a taco place in Seattle, I ate in front of the camera. It was a little uncomfortable, a little awkward because people are watching by. I went to a cafe and I recorded that, so I just got to show people what a pastor's life is like, on a Monday. It's like, what do pastors do on the Sabbath? But I also use that to show the meaning and to teach what Sabbath means. So I did like a fusion of both, something that was hopefully entertaining, but also something that was educational. For me, I feel like that's the best of both worlds, because I don't want to just upload content that's like mindless or that has no purpose, but it has to be entertaining, but also educational. And so if I could do those two things, that would be the ideal video. And so for me, I felt like that Sabbath video was a good depiction of that.
So Tim, I guess you made the comment about using this platform for the kingdom of God, that kids today, teens today are on Instagram, perhaps Twitter, YouTube, these other things. Do you think youth pastors are required to be on social media? Like, say more about the trends that you see as the parent of a teenager, of a 15-year-old. This whole thing with screen time, it's a huge struggle. Like dinner time, driving in the car, when they gather with their friends, they're looking primarily at their phones and not at each other's faces, right? So like social media is kind of the enemy to most parents, I think. I don't want to project too much, right? But you're speaking differently about social. You're seeing it as, oh, hey, if they're there, this is an opportunity for connection and communication. So to me, these are like different paradigms that youth pastors and parents may have, and it's really interesting to explore.
Yeah. So I think youth ministry is different, from church to church. And so if I were to tell a youth pastor who's thinking about whether to do social media ministry, I would say, what's the best way that you can love on your students? Right? I think that's where I would start. Because I feel like you don't have to be on social media to have any kind of influence. You don't need to be on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok to make an impact. Because at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that ministry is all relational, right? It has to happen in person. And so I'm not throwing that out. My motivation is simply this is just another opportunity, just another mission field that I want to be a part of. And I know a lot of churches don't have the resources to be able to do media ministry. So I don't want to come from the perspective of like, oh, you're not doing youth ministry if you're not, doing digital ministry. Because frankly speaking, a lot of churches just don't have the capacity to do that, right? This in-person ministry is hard enough, right? And I get that. And so I don't want to come from this position of like, oh, like you're doing something wrong if you're not in it, right? I would say, what's the best way for you to love on your students and to love on your church? And if you could do the in-person really well, and if you have the bandwidth and the capacity to do social media ministry, then yeah, maybe you should do it. But if you feel like that you can only do in-person ministry and this is the best way for you to love on your students, just do that. And so I feel like every church is different, every pastor is different. There is no one box fits all. It's just, what is your capacity and what is your ministry philosophy? And so, yeah, not all churches need to go online, and I completely understand. But there is a need to, and I feel like that's why I love the body of Christ. There's so much diversity, right? Different churches are called to different mission fields. Some churches are called to this area of the world and that area of the world. But for me, I'm called to this mission field, and so, but we're all doing the same work, right, for the kingdom of God. And so we're trying to reach as many people as we can with the gifts and the talents and the resources that God has given to us. And so I think that's why the body of Christ needs to work together and collaborate more so that we can reach more people.
Tim, that's a great note to end on. We really thank you for taking the time to chat with us, sharing your life history as well as your passion project with youth as well as with technology. And we look forward to continuing the conversation with you in the future.
Thank you, guys.